Hi, everyone. I've just got 30 seconds of stuff I want to talk to you. I'll be glad to answer your questions if you have anything on this subject. Thanks, everybody, for being here. There are a lot of significant events that brought us to this point of adding a new member to the Supreme Court. But I think that we just witnessed one of the most important votes that a member of the United States Senate can cast. Judge Gorsuch will be an independent voice on that Supreme Court. He proved that very much through the hearing, answering questions for 20 hours. I think he's proved that he's a judge's judge, and most significantly, from my standpoint, as a member of Congress, a person that wants to interpret law and not stretch the intent of Congress. So finally, I'm honored to have played a part to get this exceptional jurist elevated to the Supreme Court, a person we now call Justice Gorsuch. Now, any questions?
This confirmation came at a pretty steep political price. What does it say about Justice Gorsuch that in order to get him confirmed, you had to fundamentally change the way the Senate operates?
Okay, you obviously aren't talking about the price I paid a year ago for not having the hearing on Garland. I would suggest to you that your question creates a problem that doesn't exist. Not that it's not a legitimate question, because we've heard it for the last 2 or 3 days. What we have basically done, if your question refers to going back to the Reed rule of November 2013, I think that answers your question, but let's go back to what I made very clear on the floor in a couple statements. The statements from the Democrat retreat of 2001, when they said we got to change the ground rules. Well, they did change the ground rules. Those ground rules were changed for a lot of nominees that George W. Bush had. Then those same ground rules, because you can't have one rule for a Democrat president or another rule for a Republican president, continued through the Obama administration. So those Democrats that met back in 2001 poisoned the well that got us to where we are. It brought about the Reed rules of November 2013, and it brought around about what we did yesterday. So what does this get us to? So the bottom line answer to your question, it gets us back to where the United States Senate was between 2001, between 1789 and 2001, when there wasn't considerations of filibustering judges. Go ahead.
But to add to the mayor's point here, the idea, though, that some, 2 decades later, people look at Clarence Thomas, what happened with him, granted he was confirmed, but there is a controversy around here. Are people, for as long as Gorsuch sits on the Supreme Court, always going to say, well, he got there because of this special action they took? And isn't that going to somehow change or put an asterisk?
No, I don't think so, because you could say the same thing for the 3 people that are on the D.C. District Court of Appeals now, who got there because Reed changed the rules.
Isn't that different because it's the Supreme Court, though? I mean, that's why we still talk about Clarence Thomas 20-some years later. Most people don't know who's on the D.C. Court. They know who the Supreme Court justice is. Well,
I think Justice Thomas answers your question. If Justice Thomas, as controversial as he was, much more controversial than Judge Gorsuch is, he could get there without having a filibuster. Why would the issue even be brought up this time? Go ahead.
Are you concerned at all about animosity from the Democrats over this rules change carrying over into Trump's policy agenda?
I think Senator Durbin, in his last speech, set a tone, hoping that we can get things done. And he referred to his and my, well, I don't think he mentioned the criminal justice reform bill, but he and I are not only working together last year and so far this year, he and I meeting together with people close to the president on the very subject. We're going to do what it takes to get the comedy back to the Senate. But I think the comedy will be back to the Senate in regard to legislation. But I think it's going to take somebody like Senator Schumer that started this whole slippery slope in 2001 to drill a new well that's not going to be poisoned. And there'll be both Republicans and Democrats to help him. Go ahead.
Your committee is going to have more than 100 vacancies in the lower courts that will have to be filled in the coming months. Do you plan to still abide by the blue slip tradition?
The answer is yes, but I hope you remember that, and you could get there's research that's been done way back in chairmans before me, and I've had it brought update now, but there's been some exceptions to the blue slip rule, and I wouldn't want to say that there might not be some exceptions to the blue slip rule, but as a general proposition, the answer is yes.
Senator McConnell was at that podium earlier and called the decision not to hold hearings for Judge Garland one of the most consequential, the most consequential decision he's been involved in. When you look back at that time, what's your view about how, in your career, how big of a deal was that for you?
I don't think it's any more consequential, only from one standpoint. It isn't any more consequential than what Biden said in '92 or what Schumer said before the Constitution Society in 2007, 18 months before, that if there's a vacancy, that let the people decide and let the new president make the decision. That's the consequential thing, because we would not be doing what we did in regard to Garland if it hadn't been for the precedent that was set by those statements. The only thing consequential about this one, there was an actual vacancy, and they were anticipating a vacancy that didn't happen.
Senator, how do you think the next nomination, which is probable under this president, how do you think the next nomination, which is probable under this administration, will play out between Democrats and Republicans, given that everything that's happened?
The same way, except you won't have you won't have the predecessor vote that we had to go back to the Reed rule. Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead.
I was just going to ask, now that you've done the Attorney General sessions and the Supreme Court confirmation hearing, what's next for you on the Judiciary Committee?
Well, it'll be a lot of nominations, both for assistants to Attorney General and for all the judges that can come up, but also hopefully working on criminal justice reform, juvenile justice reauthorization. I haven't heard much about Patton. Was a big issue last time. I think the Supreme Court's getting involved in the Patton issue. That may, until we see what they do on some of these things, that may preclude our doing anything in that area. But that's what I would expect to be my spending some time on. Now, some of those things are controversial. There will be a lot of non-controversial things that I think can come up in the meantime.